Dschinghis, So, it seems I struck some kind of gold with my previous video, the second installment of my Orientalism duet. I'm glad people enjoyed it, what can I say? It really does mean a lot to me that people felt seen, especially those of you like me who are not known about. And if I'd have known I'd get so much unprecedented attention from it, I'd have actually promoted myself a bit more. Instead, I got scared of Sejam fans like a fucking puss. On the topic of that Orientalism duet of mine though, I have a feeling that it might develop into more of a series. I would really love to make a video regarding anti-Romani Orientalism, or, let's be honest, anti-Romani racism and Romophobia in modern fictional literature in the same format as my anti-Russian and anti-Swana Orientalism essays. I definitely need time for that though, and a lot of caveats given I am a Gaja. Here on this day though, I would like to counsel authors in the writing of Slavic and quote-unquote Middle Eastern characters in their books, and how to avoid doing so in an Orientalist manner. I don't want this video to be overly long or detailed. I still want you to pay for my services and coffee, since this is what I do personalized sensitivity readings for. I also don't want my poor laptop to short circuit again. What could be beneficial to do with this video is to flag what not to do as a writer/author writing Slav, West Asian, etc. characters and settings, whether that's yourself or someone you think could use such advice, as well as to propose a general framework for approaching Orientalized cultures in your fictional work, especially that which is fantasy or otherwise speculative. Let me get it out of the way right now that I'm very much hobbyist in my pursuit of this knowledge. I spend a lot of time being engaged with it, evidently, but I am not academically involved with it. I studied the unit of Indigenous Australian sociology, but besides that, the degree I graduated with was medical science, which is what I do for a job, and I write novels and poetry and draw little pictures on the side. This is advice, for sure, and it's useful informed advice, but I am not a scholar, no matter how pretentious video essays may sound. I am also talking primarily to Western authors here, and not just white ones, as well as certain members of the diaspora. Obviously, if I were to give an example of propose how to write Iran, and what sorts of things you shouldn't mix together when doing it or something, and you happen to be Iranian who sees merit in yourself or other Iranians doing that specific thing I said not to do, what I said does not really apply to you anyway. You still need to be conscious of self-orientalization, but this video isn't necessarily for you, seeing as you operate within a different dynamic. You can do whatever you want, as long as it's in good faith. Your understanding of good faith, apropos of depicting your culture, is very different to Westerners' perceived understanding of good faith when doing the same. Also, a lot of what I say here might come off as mean and shaming. That is just my tone. I know not all people like it, and I know you can't see my facial expressions to gauge exactly where I am emotionally, but please understand that I am not yelling at you. I am not speaking directly to you. I am not trying to antagonize you specifically. If something I say really strikes a nerve, I'm willing to guess that's something you needed, and instead of lashing back at me, I'd like you to interrogate yourself. People can be fixed. It just takes effort. And I'm not a perfect specimen either, let's be so honest. I'm a cunt. But I'll also put timestamps on any part wherein I get particularly belligerent if I do, just for you, Yeti. With that, haydi haydi yallah! Let's talk cultural coding. As a jumping off point, here's how I defined coding in my first anti-Orientalist video on Russia in fantasy fiction. Coding in literature and elsewhere is the allegory of or a reference to real-life cultures or peoples in an otherwise other world. Perfect. As an author who writes both speculative fiction and not, I like to approach cultural codings with the following basic principles: specificity, depth, awareness. So let's break those down. Specificuroba, özgürlük, sigekrimenopisi, specificity. That means you pick one culture. No, that does not mean you pick a region. It means you pick a nation. And nation is not a politically circumscribed country here. It is a people. We use nation in this context not to denote a political entity, but a socio-historical one. We're not speaking of, say, the nation of Iraq. We are speaking of the Assyrian nation, Turkoman nation, Kurdish nation. These are not people you can homogenize. They are very different. And if you do pick a political nation as your coding in your novel or what have you, you better be prepared to conduct thorough research, not just looking up things as you need them as you go. That is not how you code historically orientalized people into your fantasy work. You put in the effort. I recently had a really lovely person contact me to give them some pointers on writing Siberian culture. For those who don't know, which is all of you unless you know me in real life, I was born in Siberia, though I admittedly didn't live there, but my mother continued to. And after providing this person with resources, I told them that they need to be careful to be specific when writing so-called Siberian culture, because Siberia is so incredibly diverse, and so it's important to be intentional with what you're portraying. For example, not all Siberian people herd reindeer. Not all Siberian people practice shamanism, or the same kind of shamanism. Do you read me? Now that you looked upon the broad cultural tapestry of the region you wish to code into your fantasy work, and chose a specific nation to focus on, it's time to examine its deeper weave and stitch, without unraveling it, might I add. What you need to do is dig deeper into the culture you're portraying. Not just the pretty dresses and jewelry, not just the perfumes, or the food, or the architecture, but also the philosophies, the way of life, the historical context underpinning its society. The most important part of researching an Orientalized culture, which you want to portray in or code into your work, is to be able to weed out Orientalism. Duh, a bag of bricks could have told you that if you'd asked it. What a bag of bricks couldn't tell you, though, is how to do that. Unfortunately, the best way to be able to pick up on Orientalism is to be at least somewhat cognizant of anti-racism education apropos of the people and culture you're researching, and of what Orientalism actually looks like. You can take a look at my videos on it. You can consult this video by Faria Faraji, a Mazandarani Iranian creator who specifically tackled Orientalism in music. However, I would like to point out that I severely disagree with his point that Orientalism harms Western audiences the most. I frankly don't give a fuck about your entertainment as a Westerner whilst my siblings and neighbors are actively dying. And once again, you can read Edward Said's Orientalism. I'm just Said's publicist at this point. Nevertheless, I'll give you some quick-fire ways to weed out the most obvious offenders. Provocative headlines, exhibits A and B, both-sidism, but also the establishment of black and white delineations, reduction and simplification, such as blanket statements and erasure of diversity, the heavy usage of Orientalist art as exemplars or demonstration wherein it's not relevant, Orientalist here referring to the genre of art in the same vein as Impressionist or Surrealist. Obviously, stereotyping. The Islamic terrorist, the Ottoman merchant, the Russian spy, the Slavic Balkan sex trafficker, the meek, silent, oppressed Ḥabībī, the technologically advanced East Asian unspecified, the free-spirited Romani. I will go further into examples later in this video. Sexualization, think Gur Martin's Dornish or anything this woman writes. Costuming in lieu of authentic traditional dress. References to civilized people, anything to do with backwardness, barbarity, etc. When you research, you need to dig deep, you need to find own voice sources, you need to search obscure niche, and you need to corroborate, meaning you need to substantiate your findings. This depth principle, however, is a precarious game of balance. Why? What might happen is you cross boundaries. I get comments like this from Westerners almost daily. I don't necessarily have an issue with them, especially if I know they come from a genuine place, but the thing is that they often don't, and instead come from colonial-minded Western racists who invade our spaces for the sole purpose of self-serving education, as opposed to any sort of solidarity or allyship. What you are voyeurs. You feed on pain of people you don't understand to gratify your feeling of being knowledgeable and staying informed, whilst all you do is take, plunder, destroy, speak loudly over, and make things difficult for us to educate and inform, and then cry and placate and victim shame when you are called out for bigotry. Westerners are not made complicit, they are born complicit, white or not, and it is their duty to dismantle that which caused them to become intrinsically complicit, so they may no longer be complicit. Now, I'm aware the East and Global South are just as bad in many, if not most ways. I fucking grew up there. But please be so for real right now. Who of those camps has the global sway, not just the regional one? It's not our people. I want you to have brain cells. Luckily for you, I'm here to help because I'm working with at least a couple up here, charred as they may be. The final principle is a direct dovetail of the previous one. In your pursuit of depth within the specific culture you're coding, you need to be aware of what you're doing. You need to be aware of the dynamics within the region you choose. That means you need to be aware of what brandishing a country's flag means in the Slavic Balkans. You need to be aware of the relationship between ethnic groups within Anatolia or Mesopotamia or the Persian region, including oppressor-oppressed and colonizer-colonized dynamics outside of Western spheres of influence. You need to be aware of the differences between cultures, of whom certain things belong to and who also partakes in them through either exchange or via conquest and robbery. You need to be aware of relationship to land, of regional demographics, of historical homelands and context and consequences. And if all this sounds like a lot of work for your book, maybe you shouldn't be touching these regions. You should not be writing about things you are not sufficiently informed in. And being uninterested in getting deeply educated on whatever it is you intend to write about is a sign that you should not write about it. Here, you or someone else might be tempted to argue, it's just fantasy. I ask you, whose fantasy? Whose fantasy is an amalgam of Arab, Persian, Indian subcontinent cultures? Whose fantasy is a homogenized Eastern Europe and Slavic Eurasia? Whose fantasy is Japanese, Korean, and Chinese traditions blended together into a distorted mass of vague East Asianness? Whose fantasy is a sexy, mysterious Eastern woman or a barbaric Eastern man? Whose fantasy is that? Because whoever it is, you don't want to be that person. That person is a racist, a xenophobe, and a colonizer, or of a colonized mind. This is where I give the Western and diaspora authors some general examples and loose hypotheticals. Let's have one Slavic and one quote-unquote Middle Eastern case study.
Moskau, Moskau,
Here's what you're gonna do first and foremost. Get it through your head that Slav is not shorthand for Russian, neither is vice versa. Next, you are not going to center, glamorize, romanticize, or even write about, in any tone but negative, Russian monarchy and nobility, or any monarchy and nobility. Fuck the Tsar, fuck the royals, fuck the wealthy, kill them. I don't care. You are never, not ever, touching the Russian nobility again. You're also never touching the Russian spy trope, the sexy Slavic woman, or the Balkan sex trafficker, all of which have historical and socio-political implications. You are not capable of truly, deeply comprehending what those tropes mean for us. Say you choose Russia as your coding. Great. It's not. Please stop. What you need to do is look and make sure you actually depict Russian culture and not stolen things, seeing as Russia is a colonial entity which has subsumed hundreds of nations into its imperial core. Stop making your Slavic and Slavic-coded nations dark and mystical and magical and spooky. It's racist, rooted in Orientalist conceptions, and also painfully unoriginal. Stop writing some sort of gender-related nonsense like extreme violent misogyny or fantastically progressive gender equality. It's reductive, and quite frankly, no one asked you when there are actual non-diaspora Slavs who could talk about it. Just because you understand or have experienced Western misogyny doesn't mean you can empathize with Easterners and global Southerners. Gender is not a class. That is an erroneous rad femme belief.
Çok tatlısın, güzelsin, şekercimi baban senin, kaşın kara, gözün kara, kömürcümü baban senin.
We're not all Muslim Arabs. You're partaking in historically violent, erasive practices by depicting us like that, when our minority and stateless people are being subjected to persecutions and ethnic cleansings across Swana as we speak. Saying you based your Middle Eastern nation on Arab and Persian culture or on MENA culture is unacceptable and frankly offensive. Arabs and Persians are very different. Arabs from various regions of Swana are different. You really think you can homogenize an Omani Arab and a Maronite Arab from Cyprus? Please interrogate yourself if you do. And there's no such thing as MENA, meaning Swana culture. Just because certain practices span the region doesn't mean everyone partakes in them. I will immediately not trust you as a speculative/SFF author if you say a country you wrote is inspired by the Middle East, or what you mean to be West Asia. It's like saying you inspired a country by Slavs. That means nothing. Pick a culture and stay within its boundaries. Swana is absurdly ethnically diverse. It is literally the center of Africa, Eurasia, and the interface of cultures. That was a clue. Work it out from there. Stop sexualizing belly dance. It's not sexy. It's a fun, festive, communal dance that y'all have orientalized to the point of butchery. And please stop giving Swanan characters fire magic. It makes no sense. Y'all's focus on making your East Asian-inspired nations technologically advanced and borderline sci-fi, even in fantasy novels, is weird and dehumanizing. Westerners already have a conception of East Asians as being some sort of hyper-intelligent robots. It's racist. Stop using the G word. It's a slur. Stop using the capital B word while you're at it. It too is a slur. Brown men are not frightening, violent sex pests. That's racist. A Russian is not a kimono, is not a hanbok. Stop mixing up East Asians. It's Orientalist and historically insulting. Stop putting white Western characters into our countries to whitewash and white gaze us and make comparisons the whole time. But also, stop writing our experiences. You can write us, you can even bring up or reference our experiences, but you cannot write our stories, be that Slavic or Swana or anything you don't know personally. Nothing about us without us. It's a fine line, but it's there. And if you don't feel comfortable treading it, don't come near it, full stop. Blood magic. Do actual research before writing blood magic. I say that as someone who writes blood magic. It's not a dark, cool power you can just toss into your book to make it more visceral and grimy and shadowy. Most of y'all's blood magic depictions are anti-Semitic as all get out. Learn what blood libel is. Please, just make our people human, not some fancy beings. It's weird. I could keep going, but I did promise this would be a shorter video. As mentioned, I'm an author of both speculative and real-world fiction myself. I would like to show you the map I illustrated myself for my duology, particularly the regions most relevant to today's discussion, Slavic nations and Swana, and point out to you what I mean by specificity. Here's the first half of my Swanan and Central Asian nations. What you have here are Cyprus, Turkmenistan, not Turkey, Pontus Lazona, Western Armenia, Palestine with some Lebanese inspirations in the north, Al-Hijaz, as in Western Saudi Arabia. I did also base some southern parts of it on Arsir, which inevitably comes with a little Yamani coding, Kurmanji-speaking Kurdistan, Isfahan province of Iran, including 2 neighborhoods based on Tajikistan, and Kabylia, or northern Adzair, Algeria, the indigenous land of Kabylia Imaziren, but that's not its sole coding. All of the natural features I could manage to fit on this map, like Moon's Grave, the Olive Grove, Spine of Fire, Nuran Lake, Hatif Sea, have reasons to be there, and are not just put in the specific places they are put on account of being vaguely Middle Eastern in aesthetic. There's a second region that's Swana-inspired, wherein I have Sakratvelo, Georgia, Dagestan, but specifically the Avar group, Circassia, Judea is in ancient Judea, Lydia, Sumer, Assyria. They are specific. If we look over to the countries that have Slavic codings, we have Albania and Croatia here, not just blanket-coded Balkans. And over here we have Novgorod Republic, specifically surrounding the Ilmen Slavan people, which is why we have the lake there that's supposed to be a Lake Ilmen analog. Notice here too that we have countries inspired by the Chuvash, Lora Vetlet, or the colonized Tairo Chukot, Burat, and Udmurt nations. These nations, along with Dagestan and Circassia, are currently colonized by the Russian Federation. In my fictional world, which is evidently still rooted in our real world, though is not alternative history at all, I chose not to have that in order to comply with my own 3-principle framework. Additionally, this area here is what essentially amounts to half Slav, if you want, as it's based on the Polonais-Haïtien people of Haiti. The Polonais-Haïtien are Polish Haitians, descendants of the Polish Dąbrowski legions of Napoleon, who joined the Haitians during the Haitian Revolution. It's fascinating history. I really recommend looking into it. It is by no means perfect, but it is an example of what you can do. and it is relatively decent compared to what you see in a lot of fantasy. You might push back against me saying, well, how does it make sense that you are writing about Italian culture in your duology whilst lecturing us white Western authors? First of all, I'm following all of the principles I've set forward for myself. I'm also not writing about quote-unquote Italian culture. That is not the center of my ideology, and the culture I'm featuring in my ideology is not just broad-stroke Italian TM, it is very specific Italian. Secondly, I am not socially or politically capable of oppressing Italians. That doesn't give you the right to butcher a culture, white Americans writing the French, I'm looking at you, but it does alter your dynamic with it. And again, if doing what I have done, for example, does not sound interesting to you or sounds like a lot of work you think will be daunting or unnecessary, you should not be writing about these things. Stick to what you know. As we finish up, here's an exercise. I particularly want the white Western writers to engage in this one, but not exclusively. Imagine a normal girl you would write into a contemporary novel of yours, or even a fantasy one. The normal girl part is what matters, whatever the normal is relative to context. Give her normal traits, normal interests, normal hobbies, a normal life, normal romantic prospects. Now make her Moldovan or Moroccan. Obviously, some things will inevitably be different if influenced by ethnic culture. But why, especially if you have a contemporary Western setting, do you feel the need to suddenly change very prominent aspects of this normal girl just because she is of Eastern or otherwise Orientalized heritage? Can she no longer be a normal girl? Must she now be an abnormal girl? Must you center our pain as minorities in order for us to be real? You would never do that to a white Western character, I know that. I think this all really boils down to Westerners, first and foremost, not actually seeing our people as people. It is incredibly concerning to watch you guys be shocked when you see or hear about, say, West Asian folks going about their lives, attending school, visiting cafes, working, going grocery shopping, as if only Westerners have those capabilities. You know, our regions and people are actually not NPCs who only communicate information when you interact with them whilst just standing there swaying the rest of the time. We're not tragedies, we're not sensational headlines, we're not did you hear about tall tales to tell, we're not statistics. We are people. And before you can start to utilize my three-principle approach of specificity, depth, and awareness, before you can even think about writing, you need to actually accept the people you want to write about as human beings who deserve your humanity. Because I don't think a lot of you people believe that. This was Sfar from Anarchy on Page. Follow, comment, like, share, subscribe, interact, find me elsewhere. Tip me for this emotional and ideological labor. My coffee is down in the description. If you are an author, you can commission me there to sensitivity read for you and give personalized feedback apropos of the subject covered today. You say Sahol, I say Simortit, and we're all glad. Mshvidoba, do Kayoshana inshallahi.